Hey, how is it going? Chris here from 99scloud.com. In this video I will be showing you how to install the AWS CLI for macOS. Hey and welcome back. In this tutorial we will learn what AWS CLI is and what you can use it for. We will install the AWS CLI on our Mac. Then we will create an IAM user with programmatic access so that the AWS CLI can access the services in the cloud. We will then configure the AWS CLI with the new user credentials. And in the end, we will test the AWS CLI to make sure that everything works. So without further ado, let's get right started. Okay, so what is the AWS CLI and what can we use it for? The AWS CLI is a unified tool to manage AWS services through command line commands. So it's basically the command line equivalent to the web console over which you can administrate your services. You can create new AWS services, edit these services and also delete the services through the command line directly on your Mac. The command line tool is also useful to upload files to S3 buckets and other uses such as create and upload AWS Lambda code. So now that we know what the AWS CLI is and what it does, we can get started with the installation. Okay, so let's get started with the installation. AWS has a page that explains the process, so you can search for it on Google or find the link in the comment section below this video. Once on the page, you'll see that they talk about the AWS CLI 1 and the AWS CLI 2. We will use the latest, which is the AWS CLI 2, and we will use the macOS user interface installer. So click on that to start the download. Once downloaded, execute the installer over the download section of the browser or through the downloads folder. Once the installer has started, click the continue button and on the next screen, click the continue button again. You'll now see the license agreement screen, so read the license and then click the continue button. You'll get the message that you need to agree to the license, so click the agree button. On the next screen, it will give you some options on the installation. Keep this as is and click the continue button. This brings you to a screen on which you can now change the install location. By default, it will install it for all users and that's fine. Let's have a look quickly what we see when we click on the change install location button. So the recommendation is keeping the default and install it for all users on this computer. If you however choose install for me only, you will need to ensure that all the folders exist to where the AWS CLI will be installed, otherwise you will get an error at the end of the installation. You will then need to provide your password to give the installer permissions for the installation. Once the installation completed, you can click the close button. It will ask you if you want to move the installer to the trash. You can click on the move to trash button as we don't need it any longer. The next step, now that we have installed the AWS CLI, is to make sure that we have the AWS binary in the system path so that we can execute it without specifying the full path to the directory the AWS binary was installed in. By default, it is installed in a location which is usually not in the path, so that's why we are creating a symbolic link. So in order to do that, let's open the terminal window. You can find the terminal window in your Applications folder under the Utilities folder. The program is called Terminal. Once the terminal is open, you can type bash, which is a little bit easier than the default shell that comes with your Mac. If you have installed the AWS CLI for all users, then the folder will be under /usr/local, and it will be called AWS CLI. So let's create a symbolic link. As we are running the command with sudo, we will need to specify the system password. I have previously installed the AWS CLI already, that's why it is telling me that the file exists. This won't happen if you install it for the first time. Okay, now that everything is installed, let's verify that we can execute the command. Click on the Verify Installation link on the website. You'll see two commands that we can execute to check if all is okay. Which AWS will output the path to the AWS file so we know it is there. Then we can type AWS ---- version to see if we have the right version installed. Okay, we have now the AWS binary installed and ready, but if we execute it, we will not be able to do anything on the AWS cloud. The reason for this is because the AWS CLI needs to have access to the AWS cloud in order to execute all these commands. So we will now go into the AWS Identity and Access Management service called IAM, and there we can set up a user with programmatic access which our AWS binary needs so that it can access the AWS services remotely. Let's head to the AWS website and log in to the web console. In case you haven't registered yet, there is a link below this video to an article that explains how to register with AWS. You can also find the link to the AWS website in the comment section below. Okay, so once logged in, you will be able to see all the AWS services. We will, however, use the search field and search for IAM, the AWS Identity and Access Management service. IAM is one of the services you'll have to familiarize yourself with, as you'll almost always will have to use it when configuring new services or allowing users to access services. On the main IAM service page, click on the Users link and then on the Add User button at the top. On the next page, you can add a username to your liking. Under Access Type, you need to tick the Programmatic Access checkbox. AWS will only allow remote connections to this user if this box is ticked. If you don't tick it, you won't be able to remotely connect to your AWS services. Once you've done that, click the Next Permissions button. On the next page, you'll have to specify a user group. As we want to access all services, we will specify the administrators group in our case. But be careful and only do this if you know that your computer is secure. If you wouldn't want to give access to everything, you could create your own user group and only specify the services that you need access to. But in our case, we will go with the administrator permission. So tick the administrators checkbox and click Next Tags. You can use tags if you want to group services together to identify them. We will not do this, and you can click on Next Review. On the review page, you'll see a summary of what will be created, and you can click the Create User button to create the user. Once the user is created, you can see that also an access key ID and a secret access key has been created. You'll need these keys for the programmatic access, so don't click close yet. Click on the download CSV link to download the keys to your computer so that you have them for later use. You'll now see the user in the list. If you would have to create new keys, if you have forgotten to download or copy them, you could create new ones here under the security credentials. The secret key will only be visible once you have created the access key. After that, it will not be visible anymore, and you will have to create new keys if you forgot to save them. Okay, we are coming now to the next step, which is to configure the AWS CLI with the user credentials that we have created. You can use Google and search for Configure AWS CLI on Mac, or you can use the link in the comments section below this video to get onto the page that explains how to configure the AWS CLI with the user credentials that we have created. In the topic section of the site, click on the Configuration Basics link to get to the description on how to configure the AWS CLI. And then you can click on the Quick Configuration with AWS Configure. This brings us to an example page that explains what we need to do. First, we need to run the AWS Configure command. Then we will need to specify the AWS access key ID that we have created. Then we will need to specify the AWS secret access key, which we also have created. Then we need to specify the AWS region, which is the data center location that you have chosen by default. And then we need to tell how we want to see the output, and we will use JSON here as output. So let's open our CSV file where we have the user credentials. In the terminal, let's now run AWS Configure. Now we can copy and paste the access key ID and hit enter. Then we can copy the secret key and hit enter again. Then we will add the region. You can find the default region if you log in to the web console, and it should be visible on the top right. And then you can type JSON to select JSON as a default output format. Okay, the configuration completed, but what has actually happened in the background? In the background, AWS Configure has created a folder called .aws in your home folder. In this folder, it created a credentials file and a config file with all the details. So every time you run the AWS command, it will look up the credentials and the details from this file. So now that we have configured the AWS CLI and added the credentials, we can finally test if everything is working. So let's check if we can list all the buckets we have configured in our S3 service. If you didn't configure any buckets, don't worry about it. Then you will just get an empty output, but it will at least show that you don't get any error and it should work. So, and here we go, we see the list of my S3 buckets. So that was it. That brings us to the end of this video, and I hope you are now able to manage AWS using the AWS CLI. If this video was helpful, I'd appreciate if you could give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more content like this in future. Have a good one and see you in the next tutorial.